As a follow-up to my last video on perfume used as resistance, today let's talk about perfume with ties to fascist regimes. We're going to start with François Coty. Coty was one of the major perfume brands in the first wave of French brands that used synthetics in the early 1900s until his death in 1934. The Romanovs used his perfume. I have a whole video on that if you're interested. Coty was a big deal. Today, it's a multinational company that owns many luxury brands like Calvin Klein, Hugo Boss, and Burberry. François Coty was an anti-Semite and a leader of the fascist movement in France. He bought a conservative newspaper, founded another, and in them he wrote anti-Semitic screeds and declared himself the French Mussolini. He was also a friend of Mussolini, and they had a correspondence. Part of what made Coty bottles so gorgeous was the Baccarat crystal they used. Baccarat, and yes, that's the Baccarat in Baccarat Rouge, was occupied by Nazi forces in 1940. All the employees were expelled, and the Baccarat factory was used as a POW camp and a place where people were sent before they were sent to concentration camps. The camp was eventually closed and work resumed. Obviously, they did not have control over that, but what Baccarat did have control over was how they moved forward. Baccarat made commemorative glassworks for high-ranking officials such as Hermann Göring. This carafe was made by Baccarat for Hermann Göring's 50th birthday. Here's a close-up. It has, I think it's his coat of arms or something. The company also had alleged collaborators that served on their board. They were not convicted, but they were alleged to be collaborators. Next one hurts my heart so much, but Salvador Dali. He was a friend to Elsa Schiaparelli, who, as many of you know, is my favorite. They collaborated on many perfume bottles. I even have one, and I just remembered it's also Baccarat. Dali himself also started his own perfume company in the 1980s. Dali began his career as a communist and anti-monarchist, but then later he changed his tune and publicly supported Francisco Franco, the Spanish dictator, of whom Balenciaga made clothing. Dali was kicked out of his surrealist groups for his support. Hugo Boss. I would say out of all of the designers and perfume brands, this was the most directly connected to the Nazis. Hugo himself was a member of the Nazi Party, and the Hugo Boss clothing at this time was partially made in forced labor camps. The company did apologize for its part in 2011. Last one I've talked about at length in other videos, so definitely check those out, but Mademoiselle Chanel. Most of us know that she was what was known as a horizontal collaborator. She dated and lived with a Nazi officer while Paris was occupied. I don't side-eye women in those situations who do that to survive, but what I do side-eye for Chanel is that she tried to use Nazi connections to get her perfume business back from two Jewish businessmen that she had sold it to. She had sold Parfum Chanel to the Wertheimer brothers and received a 10% stake. Okay, so she sold it and was still getting paid. Number 5 was such a massive success, though, that she wanted a better deal. And because the Nazis mandated that businesses owned by Jews could be repossessed, Chanel petitioned to get control of the business from them. But they were a step ahead of her and had a French businessman friend take control for them while they fled to New York, and then he gave the business back to them when the war was over. There's also evidence that she was a full-on Nazi spy with a mission to talk to Winston Churchill on behalf of Hitler, but that's more of a gray area. Now, I'm not saying that we have to boycott companies based on their stances in World War II, judge companies by who they are today. But as wiser people than myself have said, if we don't learn history, it is doomed to repeat itself. The last thing I'll say on the subject when it comes to fascism and perfume, fascism idealizes beauty, style, and purity. They portrayed groups that they didn't like as grotesque, and I'm not going to show that because it made me sick to my stomach. Fascism is all about aesthetic. The perfume community has been having talks in the last few weeks about whether or not perfume is political. It absolutely is, because whether or not you're using a fragrance that is some part of some sort of Nazi uniform or aesthetic, if we are supporting brands that in turn support these ideologies, that is a statement that we are making as a consumer, that we are okay with supporting harmful ideologies and policy. And this is a very nuanced discussion with so many gray areas. Try not to get disappointed, because we all inevitably find out that artists and companies we love don't line up with our values. And it's okay to make that mistake. Just learn from it. It's also okay to ask genuine questions when you don't understand, or even when your instinct is to disagree. And as the great Maya Angelou once said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this subject, respectfully, of course. Drop them below, and you can find more perfume history videos on my page.